print dead or what?
Print is probably dying, but it's got a long life still to live. And any print publisher who's not thinking about how that content is being consumed is really making an enormous error. For our part, I bought a 98-year-old print magazine. Print is very strong. It's a beautiful product, and we're going to continue to invest in print for the foreseeable future. That said, strategically, we're focused on one thing, the mobile phone. We believe that the mobile phone, despite the connotation of it only being something that's interesting on Twitter or for Facebook for short little snippets, is actually increasing the amount of serious reading that is happening, and is only going to continue to do so in the future. We're going to stay an institution that's about serious journalism, thought-provoking writing, things that intelligent people, I think, really crave. But we're going to run as quickly as possible to where intelligent people are spending the vast majority of their time. And that's on their iPhone, their Android device, their BlackBerry, and to some extent to their iPads.
So I'm just going to keep with you for a sec. What's the difference between news in print and news on a mobile device, on an iPhone?
I think the biggest difference is that print is, and the iPad too, is an experience. We call it an experiential product. When you open a magazine, you've made a decision to commit a certain amount of time. You're going to go through an opener section. You're going to be led into longer pieces, and then you'll finish with the back of the book. It's a structure that everyone from the New Yorker to Time to the New Republic has had for a very long time. That works. A lot of people still crave that experience. I spend hours on the weekend taking magazines and reading them cover to cover. It's fantastic. But it's more similar to reading a book than necessarily diving into a single piece of news. I think being realistic about where the world is headed, we spend more time in front of screens than we have before, and that experience is much more about dipping in to find a piece of great writing or a beautiful image or a video that's compelling. For our part, and I think for any media organization that's out there, we got to invest in both of these things. A web-based product, which is about getting people what they want, often on the go and very quickly, but also making sure that the experience is really, really high quality so that people are willing to pay for that, even if it's something they're more likely to read in bed in the evenings or over the weekend than it is at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning.
So actually, Chris and I, even though he has more money than I do, pay people to, it's another phrase that always gets me, report the news, whatever that means. But that's somebody like Laura going out there, interviewing people, going someplace, thinking, writing, then it gets edited, and somebody like me says, change your lead, and we have to come up with a better headline for that. But basically, you're taking the stuff that we produce and pay for, and then organizing it. How does that work?
Yeah, so Pulse was started 2.5 years ago, and it kind of started from a personal pain where I thought I was a student at Stanford, and there wasn't a good experience reading your news on mobile phones back then. And everybody I saw around me at Stanford was on their phones. I mean, they were doing emails, they were reading, they were watching videos, everything was being done on the phones. This was just a couple months before iPad had even come out. And so we took an approach where, instead of going to the different websites and actually having this poor experience of reading news, we took a much more technology and design approach to this space. And at the end of the day, content is what makes Pulse. I mean, the great content that journalists write, like Lara writes, is what makes Pulse shine, because that's what people are engaging with. But we partnered with all the publishers in the US and internationally now, and are working towards bringing that content and actually making it really easy for people to consume on these devices.
What is the revenue model for that content? From a story, a Time.com story on Pulse, and that you have an ad next to, who gets that revenue?
So the partnerships are done on, there are two tiers. Either there's a content syndication partnership where Time, for example, is a partner where they've given their content in return for syndication back to their website or back to their app. And then there are partners like the Associated Press or other publishers where if there's an ad put into those feeds, then there's a revenue sharing with the publisher. And it is typically the publisher or Pulse, whoever sells the ad, gets the majority of those ad revenues.
So you don't steal the money like the Huffington Post does, that Jonah started, basically. So Jonah, you really have changed the landscape, I would say, and not just Huffington Post, but as people have said about BuzzFeed, BuzzFeed is like the Huffington Post without the meat course. It's like all dessert, and it caters to the most fun stuff that people are interested in reading, I would say. It also aggregates news and information. You're also hiring your own folks. But what is to go back to my opening remarks about news being the one part of our republic that's protected by the Constitution, what would the framers say about BuzzFeed?
Framers. I don't know if I know enough about the framers to say what they would say. I kind of think of BuzzFeed as the site that would be the #1 source for news in a science fiction novel, in the sense that we're all kind of living in science fiction in the world now anyway, that it makes sense that you would go to a site that has cute kittens, internet memes, the best political reporters, people at the RNC and the DNC on Romney's plane, 7,000-word long-form pieces mixed together with fun videos and things that people want to share.
And how do people? I have your app on my iPhone. How do people use BuzzFeed? Is it the main source of news and information for some people? Is it a side dish for people? How do people use it?
So I think the biggest surprise for me was, so I got my start making things for people to share. So doing projects and experiments, sometimes with my sister as a stand-up comic, and launching them, and then a friend would share with someone else, and they would share with someone else, and we end up doing things that would reach millions of people. And that seemed fundamentally new at the time, that if you make something interesting, it can reach millions of people without any broadcaster or publication or any gatekeeper saying, yes, this is something that everyone should see. But it was still pretty broken. It was things like email forwards and early stage of blogs. It was very messy. And so when we built Huffington Post, there wasn't a way to build a big site based on social and sharing because there wasn't the architecture yet built.
Right.
With the rise of Facebook and Twitter and StumbleUpon and Pinterest and Reddit and these new social platforms, it all of a sudden became possible to build a big site with the premise that the way content should spread is through people thinking it was interesting enough to share with their friends. And that's a much higher bar than making content for Googlebot, which is a robot that can't tell the difference between a scoop and a rewrite, that can't tell the difference between a brilliant long-form piece and a bunch of keyword-dense long-form piece. And so social has allowed new opportunities for good journalism to thrive and good reporting to thrive and better quality content for humans to share with other people. And that really BuzzFeed's premise is start with social. So social is the new starting point. And if you accept that social is the new starting point, why not make a publisher that makes content for the social web and sees that as the primary way of distribution? And just one other point, at Huffington Post, we made the front page of Huffington Post for an individual person. Like it was a one-stop shop, there was links, you could find all these things everywhere. At BuzzFeed, someone sent an email a couple years ago saying, I didn't find anything good to share on BuzzFeed today. And I said, oh, people aren't coming to BuzzFeed for themselves. They're coming for BuzzFeed to find something to share with someone else in their life. That people now, the network that distributed these early projects I did, when I did those, wasn't self-aware. Now the network is self-aware. We all know we're nodes in a network. We all know that we're publishing ourselves and we're sharing ourselves. And people come to a site like BuzzFeed to find something that they can give to someone else in their life, that they can share on Facebook, share on Twitter. And we even find guys who say, I don't really love the cute animal stuff, but my girlfriend loves it. So I come to BuzzFeed, find the cute animal thing, and share it. And I want that stuff on there. I don't want some personalized news experience just for me. I want stuff that is for other people in my news experience because social has become such a big part of the news.
So Laura, how do you react to that? How has social influenced traditional reporting? Which is something that you've done and continue to do. But I know you have feelings about how people consume international news.
I do, and just to take it back, in 2007, ABC sent me out with a camera and a backpack to cover the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that turned into that 5-year stint in the Gulf covering the Middle East. So social has become not just really the consumption thought in my mind, but it's integral to my reporting. It was key to how we covered Iran. It's become key to how we understand this Arab generation. And a lot of my work out there has been documenting this generational shift in that respect, social, political, economic. So it seems for me a kind of an end-to-end phenomenon that I have to factor in to how we traditionally report the news. It's been an amazing run. It's been vital. It's allowed us to create conversations that couldn't exist before. But that kind of pivot that you mentioned in the open is basically, we found that after 4 or 5 years of covering the Middle East, the user experience of consuming that news from the Middle East kind of sucks. The news about the world kind of sucks. It's just so hard to understand. You have a super complex world, fewer reporters abroad, and if you take an issue like the Syria crisis, it's impossible to keep up with what's happening. And it just assumes a certain context and background that people don't have, partially because we weren't there giving it to them.
So what's the remedy for that?
Well, we're basically embarking on massive R&D around a single story. So leading a group of journalists and technologists to just take something like the Syria story, specifically the Syria story, and redesign it. Just play with the content architecture, put up a web and mobile platform. We're calling it Syria Deeply. And then also take all that content, turn it into a classroom experience, working with social studies teachers to create an open curriculum, just to start getting feedback on how do you take an issue that complex and start to break it down and use the latest digital tools of the day to make it much easier to understand. And as we kept doing that, and I was reflecting on this panel on the future of news, it just kind of comes down to a basic philosophy as a practitioner about the future of news, which kind of, for me, boils down to 3 things. That you respect the user, that's fundamental to how you do your reporting. How is the user going to be able to digest and assimilate this information? You respect design, the way they do at Pulse, and you make design integral to the experience, and that you make the news about people, and not just about, with Syria, not just covering the guys with the guns and the money, but focusing on the civilian stories, realizing that when I'm in Tahrir Square, my followers on Twitter include awesome people in Minnesota and awesome people in Marrakesh who could be having an awesome conversation if they only knew each other. How do you factor that in now? It's like a fundamental redesign. And as someone, I was super inspired by what you said at the Open. We can't afford not to understand what's happening in the world. I think we thought we could, but we can't. Mm-hmm. And the only way to go quantum in how we explain it is to take everything that's happened in digital in the past 10 years and everything I've learned covering the Middle East and just mix it up and just try new recipes. So we're hunkering down to do that kind of R&D and see what works.
I don't know if you all had this experience, but was it 2009, the almost green revolution in Iran, when, and I guess I had not been a big user of Twitter before that, and suddenly there were these Twitter hashtags, Green Revolution, Iran, all of these other things, and you were having, in real time, hundreds and thousands of tweets from people who were in the square or dodging bombs or shooting guns. And it was this kind of amazing experience because you felt like you were there. You were there in a sense. And obviously, if Twitter had existed during the American Revolution, we'd know a lot more about it. We probably wouldn't need so many journalists to cover it because we would have been, getting Paul Revere's tweets right there, and we would know what was going on.
That story would have been dead if not for Twitter. All of us in the mainstream had moved on. It was the Twitter alarm that set us off. And that meme, the Iran election meme, the Neda meme, it was the memes that kept that story alive. And if you knew people on the ground in Iran, it wasn't so hard because okay, that guy I know in Mashhad is tweeting. Not, is that guy really in Mashhad or is he in Michigan? So it was that intersection of the traditional and that.
But so how does that, Joan, I'll ask you, I mean, when I was talking before about news being a kind of artificial thing, the way it's mostly done now, when you have tweets, it is the closest thing to a kind of primary source of something that's really going on. How does that affect the way people consume news and perceive news as compared to, laugh out loud verticals and cat videos?
I mean, Twitter is is an amazing service. What's interesting about social platforms is that people find their little niche within Twitter. So you follow people that you respect or that you're interested in. And then you start thinking of Twitter and Twitter's brand as being about serious news, for example, if you follow only people who do serious news. Meanwhile, there's 14-year-old kids who are following Justin Bieber or Rihanna or stars. They think of Twitter as this awesome way of connecting directly with celebrities. And then there's the tech people who just follow all VCs and entrepreneurs and tech people. So there's these totally different universes within Twitter, and everyone's like, Twitter's awesome, I love Twitter. You shift to media, the businesses that we're in, and the problem that you see in media is that we have, right now we're ranked 5th on memorandum for politics. So there's Politico, the New York Times, The Hill, Washington Post, and BuzzFeed. And those are the top 5 in terms of breaking scoops in politics. And a lot of amazing brands that are on that list below us. But because we have a cute cat video, you can look at that cute cat video as if BuzzFeed's about cute kittens, or because we have a meme or a web culture thing, people look at that and say, oh, this is about internet culture or humor. And people don't say that to Twitter or to Facebook because they're in their own bubble within these services. But with media sites, you publish one thing that someone doesn't like or thinks it has a skews to the left or skews to the right or whatever, and people say this whole site is biased and this whole thing, So I think one thing we have to get past is what are the disadvantages that we have in media businesses that media publications love to point fingers at other publications and say they have this article, therefore they're a bad publication. And then they embrace Twitter and love Twitter, even though it has all kinds of things on it and it's totally diverse. And the truth is, we talk about this like BuzzFeed is like a Paris cafe. You go to the cafe, you have your copy of Sartre, you have Le Monde, you're reading about the news of the day, you're reading the philosophy, and then invariably there's a cute dog at the table next to you, and you bend over and you pet the cute dog. When you turn away from the philosophy and pet the dog, you don't become stupid, you just become human. Like when you flirt with someone at the next table, or when you gossip about some trivial thing, that doesn't mean that you aren't high-minded and you don't care about the news and you don't care about what's happening in Syria. So I think we need to move on the web, which is much more network-centric, and it's more about lines and less about like one single place that has everything carefully constructed. People like the Paris Cafe better, and even if you don't like this idea, you don't have a choice because the Time Magazine article is going to be next to a cute kitten and someone getting drunk in the Facebook newsfeed, and you're going to be next to that content anyway. So people don't want to go to a library and read their philosophy. They want to be in a place where there's all these different things that make us human. And BuzzFeed's view is that you should do that at the source as a publisher instead of just having all of the tech companies do it for you and mash them together in their news streams. Why don't we make content for the whole person and for all the different things that make us human?
But Chris, what does that do to brands like yours or mine, where we're creating content ourselves, we're spending money on it? You could argue that Time itself, when it was created in 1923, was the original aggregated news site. It had those different verticals, show business, foreign policy, sports. I mean, it was aggregating information in 1923. There were 26 daily newspapers in New York City in 1923. It was partially started because Luce thought there was an overabundance of information and that he needed to simplify it for people like any of these aggregation sites. So with the economic model where we have to pay for our own stuff and yet other people are making money from aggregating it, what does that do to primary source brands like ours?
I think the part where I definitely agree with Jonah is not only that looking at what's considered more fun or superficial content doesn't take up time that might be spent on serious content, but I might even go a step further and say that all of these august media institutions that existed before the internet, almost all of them had some dimension that was the candy. You could think of the cartoons in the New Yorker, or you could think of the modern-day New York magazine, which has fantastic political journalism, but will put burgers on its cover and have a cheap eats issue. I think that there's been a relationship between content that might be considered fluffier or more fun, and serious content for a very long time. And it's in fact been what has often powered the business models of a lot of the media institutions that are out there. Now that said, I do think that in the media world, when we talk about the media world that is serving a particularly curious group of politically engaged or intellectually engaged citizens, which is a smaller set than perhaps the entire population, I do think in that sphere, brand matters more now than it ever has historically. And I think that people want to be a part of something larger than them, and that we use signals, including media brands, to say who we are. We turn to these brands as I won't say bumper stickers, but at least ways to express our political sensibility, our intellectual sensibility, and what we care about. And so for my part, I think that investing in a brand that really says something very clear and very aspirational about who you want to be is what any media company needs to do moving forward. And that's going to include providing some probably physical print product, at least for the next few years. But it's also going to include things like events. It's going to include things like a premium way to experience the content, whether it's on the go or in a variety of different contexts. It's got to be a larger brand vision
Chris,
to make
if I
much
have
sense.
Pulse on my iPad, and I can get New Republic stories on Pulse if I click on politics, how does that affect your brand hypothesis in the sense that, well, do I really need to subscribe to TNR if I can get it on Pulse or get it on BuzzFeed or get it on
You can't get it
some
on
other?
BuzzFeed.
What?
You can't get it on BuzzFeed. We don't aggregate other sites.
But I think your point is well, there's the question
And
of the
that's- and
revenue
then it's
model,
the
but then
free-
there's
it's
the
right,
question
the
of the
free
brand.
versus paid.
Right. So the branding. I mean, we can wade into a Twitter stream, use news organizer like Pulse at any point and get access to content. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the type of news reading experience that an intentional news reader might want. These things are not a zero-sum game. I think smart people use Twitter to understand what's happening in the world, but we also tend to go to NewYorkTimes.com or Time.com or whatever media brand to understand what's happening outside of the conversations that are happening. On the question of the business model, I think that does illustrate the point that if it's just about getting access to the content, perhaps in a few cases where we're seeing metered paywalls work, for daily news sites, that might work. But for things that are doing sort of larger, long-form journalism, I'm skeptical that that's a really sustainable model in the future.
Right. So the model, so for all of us and people both bigger and smaller, I mean, the way the news business has always worked is there are two revenue streams. You pay for it, you're a subscriber to a newspaper or a magazine or whatever it is, and then the content has advertising next to it. So the advertising actually subsidizes the cost of what it costs to create that product. So everybody has this illusion that the news is less expensive than it is. I mean, someday, you're going to tell your children or grandchildren that, here's what people used to do. They used to go into forests, and they used to chop down trees, and they used to turn them into paper and put ink on it and send foreign correspondents all around the world, put ink on paper that had words on it, and then hand deliver it to your door, right? I mean, think about it. Is there anything that you have hand delivered to your house that you don't prize? And yet we throw out the newspaper, we wrap fish in it, we use it as kitty litter, and it's brought to your door, right? I mean, someday that's going to seem like the greatest luxury that ever existed. But now, it's kind of going away. I mean, so I'd ask you, it's a little bit of an editorial, but so you're in the new model of these things, right? So if we all weren't creating original content, you'd have nothing to organize.
Yeah, I mean, to your previous question, I think like Pulse and publishers can actually coexist. And I think the way I see Pulse is in some ways, it's a discovery platform. Like, to give you a great example, one of the partners Pulse has had right from the very beginning has been the Wall Street Journal. and we've kind of aligned ourselves with them. And so, right now you can actually get a snippet of Wall Street Journal articles within Pulse, which you can read and actually can go to the website. But we did a very smart partnership about 6 months ago where we said, and this is the first time the Wall Street Journal did this with any other organizer or any other kind of publisher, where we came together and we thought we have to rethink a lot of how we can actually sell, how people can pay for content, right? And right now you could be a free subscriber and read a few articles maybe in Wall Street Journal, or you can pay maybe $35, $40 a month to get the full subscription. Where Wall Street Journal and Pulse came in and said, can we simplify this? Can we basically make it into small chunks that is easy for people to understand and easy for people to pay for it? And so today in Pulse, you can actually buy just the technology section of Wall Street Journal for $4 a month. You can buy just the politics section of Wall Street Journal for $4 a month. You can buy the latest stories that are being published in Wall Street Journal for $1 a month. And so we've taken an approach, a very interesting approach, where we've seen there's a lot of people who will read for free, and there's a very small portion of people who will pay $40 a month.
Right.
And so the approach we've taken is can we take these millions of people who read for free, get a smaller section of people who pay for something. It's like when you get an iPhone and you buy your first app, that's the big jump, where you've put in your credit card, you buy that $1 app, and then you buy $5 apps, you buy $20 subscriptions. It's very easy.
Yeah.
And so we get to that stage, and then we're seeing these people who are buying $1 a month to actually buying full subscription in Wall Street Journal.
It's interesting because you can have, for all of us who create content, you can disaggregate your content, but if you can disaggregate the payment for it and get payment through those other avenues, that would be great. So Laura, let me ask you, I'm sure you're thinking, your project, you're thinking about what do people really need to know, and who are these Alawites in Syria, and where does that come from? But what's your economic model? Are wise citizens going to pay for that? Are you going to try to have advertisers or sponsors?
We don't expect people to pay for knowledge. Our whole premise is let's craft knowledge better and solve a problem, just like Pulse solves the problem of having to go to 20 different websites. We're going to help solve the problem of why people just don't get it, and that will add value to their experience of the issue. So how we make that sustainable, we are approaching this, first of all, with super lean ops. So we're kind of hunkered down and accept that, okay, by being a startup in this space, we are testing at least 15 hypotheses at the same time, and our business model is doing the same thing. I have 9 ideas of where the revenue are going to come from. Everything from syndication, because we have incredible Syrian contributors who have incredible visibility into social media and what's relevant. If we have a scatter plot of knowledge, what you're creating is going to be much more valuable. So I'm doing our darnest to take us, in a sense, out of the news business and into the insight industry, which is thriving. The country reports model, the services, the briefings, the multimedia content for executive programs on foreign affairs. We're just thinking of this in a bigger sense. I've watched this as a reporter, as we as the news media, by and large, recede from insight about the world and foreign coverage in general. You have the Eurasia groups and the Oxford Business Groups and the Councils on Foreign Relations creating more of that substance for the knowledge pool. Well, let's get back in that game. Let's get back in the knowledge game, and then maybe part of our revenue comes from partnering with the right, because our dream is what we learned from Syria we could use to do a similar platform on Iran or North Korea or the Congo or global health or the drug war. So is it that you partner with a think tank to produce it in a joint production, just like CFR has done with some of their backgrounders? Or do you approach it in terms of, hey, we have 5 people who know this region incredibly well and can deliver incredible insight, so where can we deliver that? I've been covering as Bloomberg. What I loved about being on Bloomberg television is that when I'm on, I'm giving information that's good enough to trade on, that's free for the masses. There's value in information that's good enough to trade on. So we're going to try to harness that and see which one of those revenue drivers of our 9 ideas ends up sticking and making it possible. And we're applying for foundation grants. And we're going to Indiegogo. So that's 10 and 11.
I have some advice for you. Hire a business manager. I think that's what you should do.
100%.
But I'm joking, but we're talking about pay versus free and advertiser-supported versus people paying. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing on the advertiser side is that in industries that are changing and or threatened, the traditional balance between the advertiser and the institution skews in favor of the advertiser. So you have advertisers coming to you and saying, you know, I really like your magazine, and you know, can I run this ad, you know, right on the cover where, you know, you're endorsing my product, or I'm going to run an ad which is, you know, I'm selling napkins, and I'd like a story about, you know, how great napkins are, and everybody should use 1,000 of them a day. Jonah, you are, I mean, I think BuzzFeed is doing this thing, I don't know what people call it, native advertising or brand hugging advertising, whatever it's called, where basically the advertiser and the news institution are coming up with content together.
So that's not exactly right. So we have the same church and state separation that you have at Time, or that I assume you have at Time. I don't know.
I've never understood whether I'm church or state, but I know they're separate.
Well, there's only usually there's one person who's both, you know, and that's the cross that we have to bear, I guess. But our approach is to try to get out of an adversarial relationship between edit and advertising. I find that in business, when you're tiptoeing on a line and you're trying to not go this way or this way or that way, it's hard to like make good things happen. And so we give brands their own channel on BuzzFeed, and they publish content on BuzzFeed. And the idea is they should work, and we have a creative services team, which is completely separate from editorial, which can work with them to help them tell interesting stories, figure out what is it that is exciting or interesting or different or novel about their brand. And then they create content that they launch on BuzzFeed. And we promote in these native units that are in-stream, that are colored that Google yellow, that have a thumbnail, a headline, and a description, just like our other content. So it uses the same platform, the same CMS.
And what do you find that, how do people use that? Do they click on those stories as much as regular stories? How does that, is there a ratio that you're looking for?
I mean, they get 10x to 20x higher click-through rates than banner ads. And I think that there's a lot of banner blindness, and people have gotten sick of ads, and that's why advertising is so bad right now, where you go to a site and it pushes stuff down and takes over your screen and interrupts you. It's because nobody's looking at the banner ads, and they're ignoring them, and they're not interesting, and there's no interesting content there. So people make more and more invasive advertising. We've taken a different approach, which is make the quality of the advertising better and better. We look back to the 50s, 60s, 70s heyday of advertising, where there were great mostly ad men making, but Mary Wells and some other amazing women as well, making some incredible advertising that people actually were inspired by and would share and would talk about and would create buzz. And I think that social is giving us the opportunity to have another golden age of advertising. And you've got to give the brand their own space and let them tell their own story. You have to use your same platform so that the technology investment in the core platform at BuzzFeed benefits advertisers as well. But you need to make clear what the that this is content published by a brand, and you need to have them pay for the promotion that they're getting to get the initial group of people to see their content. But the sharing and people passing their advertising, passing the content on, we don't charge them for. So they're buying for promotion, but they have to make great content so that it will actually work on the social web and get shared, and that upside is free to them.
Right, and I mean, the advertisers have to get smarter about their own creative, I think, in this environment than they were before. I mean, one of the things how many of you folks read either newspapers or magazines on your iPads? Raise your hand. Wow, excellent. So when
How many people were lying? They just felt.
When Time launched on the iPad, we were actually the first magazine to be on the iPad, and in part because Steve Jobs loves Time. But one of the things that I was very excited about is that ads could be fantastic. I remember I shouldn't probably mention a particular advertiser, right? But there were some fantastic videos that like I remember watching and thinking, well, this is fun, this is great. And what I think the advertisers are sort of missing the trick of sometimes on all of these new platforms is that they can do advertising that is as interesting, as fun, as the content, and people won't do that thing of like, oh, let me turn that page to finish my story and move over those ads. But I have to say, I feel like advertisers haven't really taken that up. See, I'm going to the dark side right here.
No, but I couldn't agree more. I'm constantly surprised at how much the advertising conversation still is about, the content that can go in a square box, whether that's a page in a print magazine or a display ad. It seems like the real opportunity, and a lot of advertisers are quickly warming up to this idea, but the opportunity is to provide something that's experiential and that actually gets a person to pause and understand what a brand is about or what products it's offering. Video is clearly powerful. Events like this are powerful. And the social dimension, I mean, whether it's on BuzzFeed or what's happening on Facebook, I think has a real, it is qualitatively different. It's an interaction with the brand which is not only mediated by friends, but shared in a social context, which focuses attention in such a different way than something that's taking over your screen or trying to, elbow in between the content that you actually want to get to.
And actually, do you see that? I mean, are people creating ads for Pulse?
Yeah, no. So we've worked with about 12 to 15 brands. We've learned a lot from, what Jonah is doing at BuzzFeed and Facebook and Twitter. It seems like, at Pulse, what we're doing is also what we call sponsored stories. And so instead of considering it as an ad platform, you really have to consider it as a storytelling platform. And so we've had some really big brands who started off with pilot projects in the first quarter of this year, but are spending, six-figure plus amounts, which is basically taking these beautiful videos they're making already, these beautiful creatives, the beautiful photos they already have, and really crafting it in an interesting story that consumers like to actually read. And in case of one of the brands, the sharing rate for that particular brand was 25% higher than organic articles sometimes, which is fascinating because people are engaging with these stories and actually not minding them in their reading.
So I want to talk a little bit about this revenue model, and you mentioned Bloomberg, Laura. What I think we're seeing in the media space is that there are non-economic competitors now. Bloomberg, every traditional news thing that Bloomberg does loses money, but the terminals make so much money, billions and billions of dollars, that they can subsidize the traditional stuff. And the traditional stuff are sort of the ornaments on the tree and make the tree look lovely, but the tree is the thing that's bringing that revenue. Like a lot of traditional news institutions have to make money on their news product, and they can't be subsidized like Bloomberg is. Or even Chris, I mean, you're buying the New Republic, and you're basically personally subsidizing the creation of great and worthy content.
But I think there's a real route to profitability. I mean, I think there's a real route to profitability for these media institutions. It may not be the same level of profitability that existed in this, what I would posit was a historical anomaly for the post-World War II environment until about the year 2000, when there was this confluence of mega brands that were consumer-facing and needed to buy advertising, and there were just a handful of print magazines or print newspapers where they had to go. It was a great time to be in media, and there was lots of profits to be had. Now, I still think that profits absolutely can be had, even if they're not actually at that size, but it has to work in a different model than just paying for access to content in general, and particularly to a print publication. It's got to either really emphasize some of the advertising dimensions and some of the new advertising products that are getting put out there, or I think it has to come back to joining a brand that says something about who you are. The Economist is a great example, as are some of the other magazines that's out there. People pay $127 a year for that brand, and that's whether it's digital or whether it's in print. Perhaps some of that is to get access to the content, but by and large, The Economist is curating a lot of content that you could get elsewhere on the web for free. I think the big value proposition there is that being a subscriber, The Economist says something about who you are. So I think it's that type of model that we have to cope with. But there is a future there. I mean, things like The Economist and other media titles are doing quite well, even if it's not quite as well as they may have 30 years before.
And if you look at Economist, everyone's in the same game of looking for new revenue drivers, whether it's live events, services, EIU, which is squarely in the knowledge space. Needless to say, I love the Bloomberg terminal for many reasons, but the virtuous cycle it creates, which is both, yes, a question of the future of news, something will have to subsidize the reporting. But the virtuous cycle that it created at Bloomberg is that our reporting on TV was a reflection of that terminal, not just in terms of charts and oil markets.
Explain that to me.
Well, I mean, clearly I was always teasing out. I was covering oil markets, the economic and markets implication of what's happening in news cycles. So let's put that aside for a second. But because your brand, first of all, is tied to that quality and that caliber of data, it creates no room for exaggeration, for fluff, for inaccuracy. I'm very, very proud of everything we put on Bloomberg Television. And I'm never a hater, but like looking at the competition in the business news space, there's so much more hysteria on other channels because you're not optimizing for that core thing. And you're allowed to, in a sense, or you must, because you represent that terminal. So this question of what are you optimizing for? And for me, it cuts straight to the First Amendment. Like, we're meant to optimize for quality information, for vital information, for that story mix. And obviously, we decry the closing of foreign bureaus and how now we just don't understand the way other countries understand.
So are you saying, though, these poor news organizations that actually have to pay for themselves, they have to do sensational content so people tune in, but you don't have to because you don't have to pay for it?
Well, that's been the case. I mean, our ratings matter at Bloomberg, and how TV does matters. I can't speak, of course, for Bloomberg itself, but there's this feeling of, okay, there's something else to it. I think in the future of news, you have to be much more inventive about your revenue drivers. And for us, we have the luxury at News Deeply of starting super lean, so we can say, okay, we're going to see this, and then see which one of these things picks up. And you see it with ProPublica as well. This return to knowledge, this flight to quality that I'm sure the New Republic is going to benefit from tremendously. We're so tired of being confused that now there's a space, and we don't know how we're going to monetize it, but we're going to have to be super creative. And whether it's live events or branded content or the experiential dimension, what are people going to come to you for? Is it just the content, or is it the experience? Like, one thing that we're playing with is how do you craft an end-to-end experience where you can come into a site and have the background and the context on the Alawites and the Kurds and why they matter and why it matters to you in Chicago, and then take it all the way through to how you engage the story without getting too much into the advocacy space. That's another space we haven't really talked about. But places like Avaz and Change.org, which are pure advocacy, even Human Rights Watch. Look at the news arc, look at the acupuncture of the Syria story and where it's really spiked. Save the Children does a release to so many organizations, so many news organizations, of content, stories about kids in these camps and what life is like for them. And that becomes a huge spike in the news cycle. Purely advocacy. So where does that fit in? And are we going to discount them? We're plucking videos off of YouTube and put them on TV. So we can't say that is that any more or less valid than what Human Rights Watch or Save the Children creates as content. How do you marry it and then give people a way to engage the story, just have an experience of that issue that dials it up, that creates an experience?
I couldn't agree more, but what you also say puts me in mind of the idea that the future of news may be in the nonprofit world, right? I mean, should news organizations, mainstream news organizations, actually be nonprofits and have a foundation that supports them or their own, and so that they're not actually out there having to,
Maybe that's the lesson. It sure works for the BBC. When I look at foreign and what I strive to recreate, everything that we're picking up right now is BBC, Guardian, Jazeera, and as an American, I won't just let that be. Like the Brits and the Qataris can.
I don't know if you've heard, but Mitt Romney wants to bring the BBC here.
It's interesting though. The NPR.
Jonah, you were trying to get in there.
Oh, was it? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to tag on. NPR is, 10 million people give money to NPR each year, and that's not. It's not a for-profit model, but it's also not a nonprofit in the sense that it's 100% of its budget is being propped up by foundations. 10 million people say, even though I don't have to pay for this, I want to pay to be a part of it, which I do think is an instructive example of a sort of a hybrid.
Right. To me, one of the great myths of the digital age is this saying that you've all heard, that information wants to be free. actually, people want free information. And they want free information because we've given them free information. And as my uncle used to say, if it's free, you get what you pay for. Is that, have we, I mean, basically, Jonah, when you started Huffington Post, I mean, it was based partially on, I remember, actually your partner, Ken Lehrer, asking me, said, when you go on television, do they pay you? I said, no. I said, huh. So part of it was all of these people contributing to Huffington Post contribute for free, right? And so that's an interesting model, right? Instead of paying for those pesky reporters who argue with you and all of that, I can get all of these other people to create content for free, which is one side of the site. What do you see as that economic model going forward for both traditional news organizations and for non-traditional ones?
I mean, I think there's always been a lot of bundling in media, and people sometimes think of that as a negative term. But I think actually it creates a lot of opportunity to do good work. So it might be that the newspaper that launches an auto section because there's a lot of auto advertising, or a style section because there's lifestyle brands that want to advertise on it, or it might be some new media sites that also do a lot of events and generate a lot of revenue from events, or it might be Bloomberg that has terminals and also does a lot of news and reporting and hires a lot of great journalists. I think the thing that is interesting about bundles is that people usually talk about it from the perspective of like, well, this is where the real business is, and then this is just marketing and PR. Like it's the Christmas tree without the Christmas ornaments. But the most awesome thing about Christmas trees are the ornaments. I mean, the tree is important, but like the ornaments are cool too. That completes it. And you look at a company like Goldman Sachs that also is a finance company that makes a lot of money. They have a lot more problems because they're not hiring great journalists and doing something that's a public good as well as doing something that makes a lot of money. And I think that different parts of a business helps you understand and learn from other parts. So you think it's a bundle where it's one thing's for one thing and one thing's for the other, and then you realize like, oh, the ad tech industry is brilliant with data and optimization because their content is so terrible. They've had to develop all this machine learning and special stuff. What if you took some of that to deliver editorial content to people in a more efficient or better way? So what you thought was just the money-making bundle over here, all of a sudden starts making your editorial better and making things that consumers like more. Or you look at what you're doing on an editorial side and you're saying, wow, we're making really compelling content. On the ad side, why don't they make more compelling content? That would be better for consumers and better for the brands. And so something moves over there. So you have these bundles where there's lots of things, and you think you know where the value is in all of them, and then it starts bleeding together, and you don't really know where the important thing is sometimes, and which thing is incidental that it's getting bundled in, and which thing is actually essential. And so I think finding a few things that are related that can work together and making a bundle is a good way to run a business.
Now, I know I'm going to disrupt things a little bit, but I think we're not supposed to take questions. Is that right? Does anybody out there know? But part of the problem of the news media is that we tend to all talk amongst ourselves and not actually talk to people who are consuming, even though, of course, we have metrics for all of that. So if anybody has a question, come up here and whisper it or say it out loud. I don't want to get everybody have a conniption.
Also, I think the panelists aren't supposed to stand up. I understood, but okay. I wanted to just stand up for a second. Right.
What if we just had
That's the BuzzFeed moment.
Yeah.
If we just had the panel standing up, it would take about 20 minutes.
No, I know.
So here's if there are questions, seriously, come on up or just raise your hand. Okay.
Oh,
we got a mic.
So you really have a microphone. That's pretty fantastic. Okay.
So I heard you guys talking about Twitter and how it's a part of your companies and stuff. How are you guys preparing for the different stuff that Twitter is doing with the developers and with the problems that they'll be having with Twitter that a lot of developers are leaving towards app.net because they're changing their ways? And like the way that Twitter only documents a certain number of your tweets and then they get deleted. So you're not really documenting your your releases because after a certain limit, everything's getting deleted off of Twitter. So how are you guys preparing for that?
Yeah, so Twitter's made some changes in their API that have really been challenging for certain companies that are very reliant on Twitter to pull data and from the APIs. APIs, for those of you who are less techy, is just a way that you can write code that automatically can pull things from Twitter. So instead of a user going and searching Twitter and tweeting, you actually can write software that will pull content from Twitter. And some services depend on that, and they do things like pull a bunch of tweets and then display them differently or let you use Twitter in different or novel ways. For BuzzFeed, it hasn't been that much of a challenge because the way BuzzFeed interacts with Twitter is people tweeting our stories, and Twitter wants that. They want more content in Twitter's newsfeed. So we're very complementary. I just spent a fair amount of time with Twitter, and we're very complementary in the sense that they want people to create great content that can show up in the Twitter newsfeed. For companies that are pulling data from Twitter, and that's their primary business, they're kind of struggling to figure out, should we not build on top of Twitter? Should we switch and build more on Facebook? Should we make more of a standalone service and not be dependent? But there definitely are challenges when you are dependent on a big service for your business. And some people are comfortable with that, and other people, just stay completely away from it.
I think Twitter and Facebook have to solve this problem. If anyone's going to trust them to build atop them, I mean, everyone uses these platforms, and so there's immense staying power there. But you can't have an economy that is billions and billions of dollars of apps that are built on top of Facebook and Twitter, and have these API changes that just happen, at least to a lot of people in the public, in a pretty casual manner. So I think that there's a real responsibility on the underlying platforms to be very forthright with how people can use their data. And every single step that they make that enrages those people is just a huge blow to the brand, because it means that why would you build something based off of what they say today if you can't trust them to honor that tomorrow? So I feel like this has got to stabilize pretty soon.
So that brings up something, Chris, that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to circle back to. And again, if people have questions, raise your hand. So, and I don't think it's any secret, it's certainly not a secret, that mobile phones are the medium of the present, not just the medium of the future. In the developing world, there are more mobile phones than toilets now. And obviously, nobody's building landlines anymore. Whatever the statistics about, you have more computing power in your mobile phone, your smartphone now than you had in a gigantic desktop 25 years ago. So the question is, but what is the content that you want on your phone, and how is that different than content that you either want in print or on your tablet or on your desktop? Because again, and I'll just jump in, I don't want to read a 10,000-word New Yorker story on my iPhone. What do we need to create for smartphones that, and I would argue, to ratchet it up even more, that people would actually pay for?
So we have pretty good data that shows us pretty interesting kind of, how consumption is changing and how consumption is different for different devices. But so every session that kind of people turn on Pulse on the phones is about, somewhere between 4 to 6 minutes. But they do that, much more frequently than their tablet version. So when the tablet version of the Pulse comes up, it's about somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes. So it's a lot more laid back reading. With the phones, it's definitely like, as you said, it's like, what you call snackable content. It's like you're in Starbucks for 5 minutes and you want to take it out. You want to quickly see what's happening in the world. And then the longer form articles that you did discover in that time, you can save it so that you do read it. Either we see a lot of people emailing themselves the article so that they can read it later, or them reading it on the tablet. But on the phone, it's a lot more like, average Pulse user comes back 3 times a day, and it's just like, open the app, see what's going on, quickly snack on some content that they want to read, and then quickly snap out of it. Mm-hmm. Which is much different from, let's say, 10 years ago when we would just read maybe the newspaper and that was it. And I guess today, where every few hours you're coming back to reading what's going on in Twitter, what's going on in other places to find out what's what's new right now.
So Chris, I would say that the New Republic is not in the news business. You're in the insight business. You're in the context business. You're in the business of taking the commodity that is news and explaining why it's important. You know, I would say we're in the business of converting information into knowledge, right? So what is that on your smartphone? Because it takes, you know, I don't know, do you want to read a Leon Wieseltier piece on your smartphone? I'd like to have the insight that he has, but how do I get that in a form that is valuable to me in that medium?
I think you and I may disagree a little bit on this point, because I think that we're entering a golden age of reading because of the mobile phone and also the tablet as well. I think that you say you don't want to read a 10,000 word piece. A 10,000 word piece requires an incredible commitment, but you are able to read more easily and more often, given that you have all of this content available to you on your phone. And if publishers, even if they're long-form publishers, do a good job, then they can make it easy for you to start a piece, continue to read a piece even if it's only for 4 to 6 minutes, and then empower you to pick it up later, whether it's on your iPad, your desktop, or even in print, and continue that experience. I, for one, and I have a ton of my peers who are reading books on the Kindle app on their iPhone all the time. And I've been reading a very long book over the past couple months, and I spend an incredible amount of time reading in a line at an airport or something like that on a phone, and then I'll move to the Kindle, to the actual larger Kindle unit if I'm at home or if I have more time. But it's opened up an incredible opportunity for me to go deep on serious content. So I would agree with you that brands like ours are more in the insight and contextual business, but the idea that people don't want to linger when they're mobile or on a smaller device, I think they do.
I'd love everybody to chime in on this idea. I mean, what is it? What do you want on your smartphone?
Well, what we're doing, frankly, is trying to draw simplicity from complexity with what we're doing with Syria Deeply and News Deeply in general. So this question for us is integral to the whole exercise. It's just, okay, if you have some complex issue, Iran or anything else, what's vital? Okay, well, we're already highlighting that, and we're trying to really present people with, in terms of our original content, writing about the thing, like how do you really get to the derivative of that day's news. So okay, if that's what you're doing for people already, put that face forward on mobile, because if they're checking, and even if they want to have like a quick think about it, put that one sentence. So we're boiling down every day's news on Syria. One feature going to be, okay, what's happening now? That one sentence. Mm-hmm. You can do it if you have a proper scatter plot. If you're watching what's happening all the time, you can pick out what's super relevant and make it most prominent, and then put that on mobile and see if that's what they respond to. We're not going to put our video on mobile, because for people chiming in from the Middle East, they don't always have the connectivity to watch those videos. Mm-hmm. Those podcasts might not do as well. But the basic knowledge that we're generating from watching one story is really easy to kind of nuggetize. What are the nuggets of the day on this? Okay, put your nuggets forward so people can digest it, and then they can always click in for more.
So I used to hate mobile. Largely because I think a lot about how people share content with each other. And there was a period in the dark ages where you couldn't even text someone who had a different carrier. And then more recently, there was a period where you'd send something to someone who had a BlackBerry with a bad web browser, and they couldn't actually see the images or see video. And now what I've seen shifting more rapidly than most shifts that you see, that to make something highly shareable and social, or to make something go viral, to use a kind of crass term, you actually need it to work on mobile. And a huge amount, over a third of BuzzFeed's traffic is now mobile. Mm-hmm. And a huge amount of that is coming from people who are opening not the BuzzFeed app, but the Facebook app or the Twitter app, and seeing in their news feed a BuzzFeed story, clicking that, going to our mobile web version, and then in mobile web, if they can't share that story, we lose over a third of the people who might share the story. And that's the difference between making something that grows exponentially and something that decays quickly, having over a third of people not be able to share the story. And so mobile and social have converged to the point of social apps being the most popular mobile apps by far. The only people who will download the BuzzFeed app or a publisher app are people who love the brand and who really want to get everything from that one brand. But the majority, that's going to be a minority. That's like the people who come to your front page every day. But the majority are going to go to mobile web, and they're going to discover your content through social, through a social app or social platform. They're going to land on mobile web, and if the page doesn't work in mobile web, you're losing more than a third of your audience. If you can't share it easily from the mobile web, you're losing more than a third of your distribution, and so mobile has become hugely important. In terms of the long form versus short form, I think that there is a lot of snacking on mobile when you're in line and you have a short amount of time. So the majority of mobile sessions, people are snacking. But when you find yourself with a longer wait or in between an hour between meetings or on a long commute, there's a lot of people reading long form on mobile. But you find yourself in that situation much less frequently. So I think there needs to be good tools for snacking and then seeing something that's more of a meal and being able to save it for later and read it later. And there's a lot of apps that are working on trying to solve that problem.
Sounds delicious.
And there's a convergence happening too between the iPhone and the tablet, which I think is only going to accelerate. Well, it depends on what happens with some of the news announcements over the next few months. But this term like phablet, which is one of those terms I still can't. Phone and tablet are converging into a single device is I think a very real phenomenon. And as the two approach each other, I think snacking obviously is going to continue to be probably the dominant usage, but it's going to be easier to interface with more contextual elements.
I think the Kindle example is a really good one. I didn't think of it that way, but I mean, we're all reading books in like these 5-10 minute bursts, and we're reading like 1,000 pages books. And so maybe like one idea that I had was maybe like just the experience is not good enough for you to like actually save the article and then continue reading just like the Kindle is, because if you save it, if you've read 567 pages, when you go home and pick up the Kindle device, it automatically goes there.
Right.
And so maybe one experience that we could add for the long New Yorker or the big New Republic article is that it allows you to like continue your sessions on those big articles.
Yes, that would be great. Are there questions out there? How about this gentleman right here in the sleeveless Rick Santorum sweater?
Wait, is that Rick Santorum?
A question for the panel on the future of media as it relates to some things we've already touched on, specifically micropayments, a couple of other things like OLED panels that are being talked about more, making it more affordable for people to be able to digest some of the news that we're talking about. And then also, Mayor Emanuel put out a challenge to the broadband community last week with regard to increasing the speed in the city and affordable gigabit broadband here in Chicago, which obviously would only help being able to consume news on your mobile devices a lot faster. So maybe some random comments about that.
So I'm going to jump on the micropayments part of the question. I have to say, I don't know if this was, it was obviously poor prognostication, but I would have said 10 years ago that micropayments would be the way that the digital news space would actually make money. In fact, we ran a cover story about 5 years ago by Walter Isaacson, basically, I think the headline was, newspapers are dying, but the was making an argument that micropayments would be the way to save everybody. Well, that turned out not to be true. Why is that? I mean, and why can't I would still opt for micropayments if you could have the back end and the technology that would actually work, or is that just a harebrained idea?
I don't think there's one way to save everybody, and everyone keeps looking for that one way, and then they are crestfallen. It's going to be a product mix, a revenue mix, a portfolio theory of the future of news, not that one thing that restores the one thing we lost.
You see, I don't know, everyone always says there's no silver bullet. I think there is a silver bullet.
I'll take you
But,
on.
but I've been wrong about that.
What is it? Tell me.
I'm not telling.
The silver bullet is figuring out what the silver bullet is.
But micropayments? Did you ever look at that, Jonah, as a way to go?
No, I've never been so into that, just because I like open information, and I mean, we've even had situations where we've done a story. Michael Hastings did this piece on hospital conditions in Afghanistan that got a lot of attention and spread everywhere. And then some people pointed out, well, the Wall Street Journal already did a story on that, which Hastings knew. But it was behind a paywall, so nobody saw it. And so it didn't have the effect that breaking a big news story would normally have. And so I prefer to have, I feel like, having to make the choice between making more money and serving the public interest and having information out there it's just like no decision. Like, you should find a better business model than locking stuff up. Micropayments has worked in some, iTunes 99-cent songs is micropayments. And I think that with growing economic inequality, there's probably people at the wealthier people who probably would say, oh, if I can just look at anything and there's no paywalls exist for me anywhere on the web and it only costs $1,000 a month, that'd be great. If they're wealthy enough. So there may be some business models for that take advantage of the growing income inequality in the country, which is sort of that could be promising. And it's partly why The Economist does well, right? People who read The Economist are wealthier, and whatever it was, $200 a month or whatever, or a year or something, isn't material to the average Economist reader. So there might be some paid media models, or a Bloomberg terminal. I mean, that's thousands of dollars a month, but isn't material to a hedge fund manager. So there may be some models that make sense, but the long tail of people don't have a lot of disposable income, and if they don't know if the article is going to be interesting or not, it's hard to pay up in advance. Right. You'll buy your Rihanna song in advance because you heard it on the radio and you know it's an awesome song.
Yes.
People who have the value, in other words, the people with the information would be paid for it. I mean, instead of the middleman, that is what is fueling the new economy, is the access to individual information and privacy. All these fights that are going on with regard to that are all about mining information. This is where the new money is. It seems to me that there should be some discussion about how we access, and that seems to me to be, there has to be a way to go directly to the people.
I mean, another way I think to reformulate what you're saying is that if you have the information or the insight first, it enhances your reputation. And so there's a whole economy, if you will, of people searching out for to be the person who gets to share something that's an interesting tidbit, and as a result, gets social capital as a process, which I definitely agree with. I think that that's very much, it's not altogether different than before any of these networks existed. If you were in on the news or the gossip and you had it before everybody else, then everyone wanted to talk to you. So I definitely see that. The question is that monetizable for either media publishers or for the networks themselves? And I mean, I think it's an open question. I haven't seen any models that would suggest that it is, but maybe someone else has better ideas.
But I think we'll see all different, there is no silver bullet, but we'll see all different models of people trying to monetize both their content, their audience. I mean, you mentioned The Economist. I mean, The Economist model, in a way, is it's a club. It's like a really big club of people, and they pay for membership, and they get some feeling of satisfaction for being a member of that club. By the way, do you know how much it costs to subscribe to People magazine for a year?
110, I think, right?
Wow, you've been doing your homework.
3 million subscribers, too. It's very successful.
One more question. How about that gentleman right there? You want to get the microphone? Oh, sorry. Okay. A newspaper reader. Okay. Yes.
Yes. I may have misunderstood this, because I am a newspaper reader. I've never read Buzzword, but I am concerned about the objectivity of having advertisers write their own stories. I mean, how are you going to, it's just one long ad. How are you going to trust whether that is really accurate information? I mean, isn't that what news is?
So advertisers write their own stories all the time. They're called television ads, or you'll see in the New York Times full-page ads written by created by BP or created by Morgan Stanley or created by whoever buys that advertising, and they have agencies that they work with to tell their story. And part of the role of the press is to make sure that companies and government and are held accountable for things that they're doing in the world and things that are newsworthy. But it really is, what we're doing is really the same as advertorial content that publishers have been doing for 100 years. The main difference is that they're doing it on the web, and the consumer has a lot more power to decide whether or not they're going to share something or not share something. So in some ways, I would think advertisers are held more accountable in this model than in the traditional models, because the consumer is seeing the content. They can comment on it. They can write on Twitter. They can say, this is bullshit. This advertiser is lying. And that is something that brands are very concerned about. They don't want the web, which is policing brands in a way that we haven't really seen before. They don't want them to have a backlash and attack them. So they actually have a lot of accountability to make content that is credible.
So I want to thank our fantastic panel. It really was a privilege for me and really for all of us to be with you. These are the folks that are really on the front lines of creating what the new model is for news and information, and we will get there even without a silver bullet. So thank you so much.